Good afternoon, it's John Heaton, and today, inspired by a trip this morning to a Beatles museum in the town called Eger in Hungary, which is about, so we were in the Matra Hills for 3 days, which is in northern Hungary, and then Eger is a bit of a detour on the way back to Budapest, but not that much of a detour. It's about an hour and a quarter drive away from Budapest. And we read online that there was a Beatles museum, and it was more or less a kind of long-time collector showing off his collection. So we went there, not with high hopes, and were very impressed. And then it got me thinking whether I could put on a similar museum. I mean, there's a lot of work gone into the exhibits, and a lot of money being spent on nice framing and nice storyboards and videos and stuff, and there's a shop. But in terms of collection, I've got a few things, and obviously it would be nice to contemplate doing that one day, having maybe open up a section of my house in Budapest or wherever I'm living to show off my collection. Mind you, there was no security in this museum, so the guy obviously trusted members of the public not to nick things. I hope he doesn't suffer from that problem, because there were some pretty valuable items just loosely hanging. Well, a lot of them were locked in display cabinets, but a few bits and pieces were loose. So that was a little. Well, I was impressed by his trusting nature. So I didn't get to meet the owner, but there was a picture of him with Ringo. He'd managed to meet Ringo, and Ringo came to Budapest. This is the flyer. If any of you are in Hungary or in the Eger region, it's worth a trip. One guy in the guest book says, best Beatles museum anywhere, and that includes Liverpool. Well, I wouldn't disagree. I mean, I've been to the Beatles museum in Liverpool, but this is altogether more personal, and it had, autographs from Patti Boyd, Derek Taylor, Tony Barrow, and, a very personal collection, as I said. I picked up this fridge magnet, which was pretty cheap, and I picked up this book, pretty cheap, which is in, I don't know if you know this series, but they come up with these nice pocket-sized books. And I've got the Stones and Lennon and Bob Dylan and Paul Simon, but I for some reason I don't think I'd ever picked up the Beatles one, so I found that, and it's not that easy to find these days, or I don't see it very often. So with that, I picked out a few things from my collection to show you. I'll just whiz through them because there's quite a lot. Here's another sticker from the museum, by the way, quite nice. So some of them are more interest than others. These albums came out in the early 80s, documenting the Beatlemania tours, and there's mainly interviews with them at the airport or at a press conference. It's not I wouldn't highly recommend that, although it's probably not cheap to find a copy of that now. And this is the same kind of thing of them down in Australia. This is getting slightly more interesting. This is a compilation UK only, or European only anyway, not released in the US, which came out in '66, a collection of oldies, but goldies, with a very nice picture, which I think is taken in the Japan leg of the '66 tour. And it's, as compilations go, it's a good one, because a lot of them are singles. There's not many album tracks on here, with the exception of Michelle, Yesterday, Yellow Submarine, Can't Buy Me Love, Hard Day's Night, Ticket to Ride, and then the Rigby. So there's 6, 7 or 8 which are on albums, but the rest are singles, or Bad Boy is exclusively available to that album. Then we move into the late 60s. So George put out this avant-garde album. It's pretty dreadful in my opinion, but it's on the short-lived Zapple label, so it's interesting for that. And this is an original press. I did a separate short appraisal of this album on my channel, which some people got upset by. I think I can't remember what I paid for this. It wasn't cheap. Maybe 20 or 25 quid back in the early 80s. These are some of my Yoko albums on Apple. Particularly interesting for the Apple label. And instead of John's face on Imagine, we have Yoko's face here with the cut apple. So that's a nice companion piece to Imagine, similar to Plastic Ono Band, Yoko being a companion piece to John's Plastigona band. Again, mirroring the labels and stuff. And the cover in the case of Plastigona band. This is approximately Into the Universe. I think this apple is, yeah, again, I think that's similar to the Plastigona band apple. A cut apple on the back. And again, these albums didn't come cheap in the day, and I'm not sure if I was terribly into Yoko's music. I was just a completist. I've since come to appreciate her music quite a bit more, but at the time I think I was just picking them up because they were very collectible. This is on the more standard apple. I think this is a US press. So Yoko was on Apple up until this album, Feeling the Space, and then Apple folded shortly thereafter. This is Mary Hopkin Greatest Hits. Very nice condition, this copy, and on the US Apple, or is it UK? I can't remember. US. So I'll put that back later. I know I've showed this before, but I can never resist the temptation to show you these glorious red and blue albums on coloured vinyl. And I saw a copy of this and the blue for going for 60 quid each, I think it was, or 70 quid even. So that's about $100. It's not cheap, but I got this for 15 quid because it's not in very good nick. And the blue album I got again pretty cheap because it's not in brilliant condition, and unfortunately it doesn't have the hype sticker on the front here saying blue vinyl, which is a bit of a shame. So I'll always be on the lookout for one of those with the hype sticker if it's not 80 quid or 70 quid. So I think I showed you this the other day. This is my Band on the Run picture disc from '78, when picture discs in '78 were all the rage, and they were coming out a lot, and now they're collector's items. This is the sheet music to Junior's Farm with the Worth It. I bought this for the classic picture on the cover. By the way, before I forget, in Notting Hill, in that same shop, I saw recently a copy of Carol Bedford's Waiting for the Beatles in hardback, and they were charging 60 quid. I used to have this book and I've lost it over the years, and so I didn't pick it up. I would have probably paid 20 or 30 quid for it. This is Wilfred Mellor's Twilight of the Gods. I used to have that book as well, and lost over the mists of time. And again, before I forget, a friend of mine, Adrian Allen, has just released a book on McCartney. I think it's called McCartney After the Beatles, an appreciation. So look up the name Allen, Allan. He's approached, I think it's about 80 McCartney solo songs or wing songs from a musician's standpoint, analysing chord structure. So quite technical, but the bits I've read have been quite illuminating, and definitely looking forward to picking that up when I'm in England next time. So, and I'll do a review of that separately, that book from Adrian. Rock and roll music. So this, not particularly rare to find, but the reason I picked up this copy, this is an Indian pressing on the Apple label, which I thought was very unique, because normally it's on the Parlophone label, or the Capital, I think the Capital label, because it's a US, well, it came out in both territories, but I think it was conceived of in the US, and obviously everyone talks about the US style cover and stuff, which I quite like. But anyway, the main point of interest there is the Apple label. Wings Over America's songbook. I'm not going to open this for you, just thought I'd show that for you because it's so rare, I hardly ever see it. Linda McCartney, Seaside Woman, 12-inch single with B-side to C-side, which is a nice little track on the B-side. This album featuring Ringo Starr and Donald Pleasance from 1977. I paid quite a bit of money at the time, and it's got the original cut out and colouring in bit But I think this album, and it's in pretty good shape. It's on the Polydor label, apart from having an annoying hole in the middle there. I think you'd be paying 60 or 70 quid for this album, but one of my collector's items there. This again, not particularly rare, but just sentimental value, because when this album came out in '79, it was originally part of a box and then it was released separately. It was the first time that we'd had a lot of the tracks on vinyl, like I'll Get You and Slow Down, and on an album anyway. They'd been released on singles. This one's close to my heart because it's from the Final Wings period. Picture disc, not that hard to find, I don't think. McCartney Interview came out the following year. I think it was released and deleted the same day, and it was from 1980, and it's recorded in his offices in Soho Square in London, and he's just got the journalist with him, and it's very informal. You can hear Paul's making the tea and saying to the guy, "Do you take sugar?" and stuff. And they're covering, not the bog standard topics that you hear from McCartney over the years. He tends to repeat himself these days, obviously, because he's been interviewed so many times. But this guy is asking interesting questions, and he's covering interesting topics like Give Ireland Back to the Irish. McCartney 2 obviously just come out. Beatles, Haircuts and Image. The Beach Boys, Rubber Soul, Revolver. There's loads of questions I would ask Paul if I met him. And first and foremost, I think, would be, what do you think of... I'd ask him more about what he thinks of his contemporaries musically and TV-wise, who's his favourite actors, have you ever watched Doctor Who? Loads of questions like that, because people don't ask him about what he used to get up to in the 60s and 70s. So that's the kind of thing I would ask anyway. A bit off track there. Temporary Secretary 12-inch single. Again, not massively rare, but nice to have. This album nearly came out in 1985, and it's actually this is a bootleg, but it was nearly released, and it would have included Leave My Kitten Alone, amongst other rarities. Now, someone said, wouldn't it be nice to have a book of Beatles monthly pictures? Well, this, as I said in my reply, this book came out a few years ago, and is very nice. Got a facsimile calendar of the Beatles from 1964, and then just loads of pictures. The Beatles Monthly had special access to the Beatles. I was going to say throughout the 60s, that's not quite fair. Up until about 67 they did, and then they had to rely on photos from other sources such as Mal Evans and Linda. So it covers the early to mid period very well. Then for my museum's tour de force, I would show this Ringo autograph. As you can see, it's a pretty good autograph. He's not doing the star, he's doing the full name. And I obtained that, not quite in person, but next best thing. We'd heard rumours that Ringo was not very keen on signing autographs if you asked him in the street, so I rang on the doorbell of his office's stroke flat in Kensington, and his helper answered the door, and I said, "Can I leave this with you and I'll pick it up next week?" And she said, "Yeah, sure," and I picked it up next week. So there we are. This is me and Paul from June the 19th, 1987. Signed by Paul and Linda. So that's nice, obviously. Not sure if I trust having that on display in my home in front of members of the public, but anyway. This was a cartoon I did for Ringo at the time of his Time Takes Time album release. I sent it off to him and just said, "Here's 2 copies, keep the original and please sign the photocopy and post it back to me in the enclosed stamped addressed envelope," and that's exactly what he did. So you can pause the video if you want to read what I said in the cartoon. So that was my little collection. I may take myself up on my suggestion and open this museum one day, but in the meantime I thought I'd share that with you. Thanks for watching. See you next time.